All right, welcome to episode number 9. I can't believe it's been 9 weeks in a row. Kind of blows my mind. 9 weeks, and it feels like it's gone by really fast. Somebody says they noticed that the NMR value staked is different from the staked total tab now. Did the increases for pending rounds get dropped from the running total? And I thought, who answered that one? JRAI. I don't know who that is. I'm not sure if they sign on to office hours. But has anybody figured out how to align the reported stake value with what's actually going on? Yeah, I haven't either. I know that the team was working on it this week, and I assume that that's what's going on. Will the rep score and leaderboard matter much after bonuses are gone other than bragging rights? Will rep score be replaced by something else? I think that the intrinsic value of the tournament is your rank, kind of like Kaggle. So I really hope that they keep reputation, even if it is meaningless or maybe rewardless, because I think it's something that at least my students, for sure, can put on the resume that they participated and here's their rank. You know, there's what, 1,000 individual accounts, or there were a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, 3 of them were mine, but guess what? 3 of them are in the top 100 staked. I think that's saying something. It still is a quality indicator. If your weighted average of your reputation is positive, it shows that you've consistently given high correlation, and that can be ranked over time. So I hope they keep it. I think that it has value, even if you can't earn Numerai on it. But yeah, other than bragging rights, no, probably not. Except, you know, you just want to consistently submit, because if they do introduce some kind of rolling payout system similar to reputation, you're going to want to have those consistent results through time. So don't skip weeks. I think that's the takeaway, and history would indicate that that's also the right thing to do. And that
I
had
like it as well.
so that's a very popular question. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I like the leaderboard as well, but it would be nice if we were somehow compensated as well, rather than only. I mean,
Yeah.
I can see the value of that as well, but yeah, it would be nice if we could also somehow be compensated for being, on the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah.
But I can also say it's easy to game. I don't want anything that can be gamed easily as well, So,
Well, that's
so
the
I don't
risk,
know what the
right?
solution is.
Yeah, that's the risk. I one time said that perhaps we could just do a once a quarter bonus. You know, maybe every 12 weeks you get paid out in a nonlinear function on reputation. But again, like Mad Men's still top of the board. It's been there for a long time. So to your point, it's difficult to avoid the gaming. I think we just kind of have to go with what the team gives us in this sense, because throughout the years, there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of proposals for ways to compensate people without staking. And ultimately, that just doesn't work. But yeah, I'm a fan of the leaderboard. I hope it stays. I don't want to go anywhere. And I think there should be other leaderboards too. Like we used to have badges, right? Who's had the highest sharpe over 20 weeks rather than just correlation? Who submits at the last minute most of the time, right? Like who has the longest running models? I think that's what that would be an indicator of. And Joe's asking, would you blend or optimize your models to maximize validation 2 correlation or sharpe? If so, what is your strategy to avoid overfitting the validation 2 data? Well, I don't know that maximizing just on validation 2 makes any sense, because that was a crisis period. And based on what Richard said in previous weeks and in the fireside chat, this data is also not a full year. And since it's the COVID-19 drawdown, it represents a very special segment of the data. And I would be concerned to have a model that performed very well on validation 2, but perhaps didn't do well on validation 1. I wanted to do well on validation 1 and 2. Now, how do we do that? I have no idea. I haven't played around with it that much, but I have made my models trained on validation 1 and 2. So since last week, I finally installed XGBoost. Woohoo! Because that was a nightmare. But I figured it out. I wrote down all the steps, so I'm going to release that soon, quote unquote soon. Yeah, so I've got that spooled up. They're uploaded to compute. And I'm just going to wait and see how it performs. because I have no idea what that data is going to do to me, but we'll see. But yeah, so I don't know that validation 2 is all that relevant from a single perspective. I think that it's just more data to look at. If you can get a model that does well in validation 1 and validation 2, or just misses very few times on validation 2, but does well on validation 1, I think that's a pretty good model. I would be concerned if it did bad in validation 1, but good in validation 2, because that seems like you're fitting to subsets of eras. What's a good correlation in sharpe for validation 2? Wow, 2 questions in a row on validation 2. I don't know if I can beat this horse anymore. We don't know. Nobody has any results on it yet. There's no way to know what a good correlation is for validation 2. It's too soon. It hasn't even really hit the data set. We just have a preliminary release. So let's take a chill pill on that and wait about a quarter and see how we do. Some of us are training on it, others are not. And I think that will be an interesting bifurcation. In fact, I would say that we should probably take note either in Rocket Chat or somewhere of people who are willing to say that they train on validation 1 and 2 and what those models are. We can track performance over time. I'll tell you that Arbitrage, Leverage, and Collabor Capital, those 3 models have validation 1 and 2 starting with the round that opens on Saturday. So there's your timestamp. And I've told you which one of my 3 have it. Arbitrage 2, Leverage 2, and Collabor Capital 2 only train on the train data set. And so that'll give you a comparison of my 2 approaches and how my performance changes based on it. So there's your timestamp, at least for my models. If anybody else wants to volunteer and out themselves, that'd be cool. If not, I understand. How about you, Michael Oliver? I'm going to call you out.
Yeah, I haven't actually had time to play with validation 2 very much. That's on my to-do list. I want to run all my models through it and see how they actually do, but I don't know if I'm going to change any of them in the near term. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how my feature neutralized ones do. They seem to be doing okay so far in live, but we'll see.
Yeah, I can't get that code to work. I have no idea what it's doing.
Oh, I mean, what it's doing, or like an intuitive thing for what it's doing is it just doing a linear regression per era of the features and then subtracting it off. That's all it's doing. Okay,
so it's doing a regression per era on the features, but so then if you neutralize your predictions in that first era,
what's that?
Wouldn't it depend on which era you pick as your first neutralization?
No, so you do each era independently. So you basically, for era 1, do a linear regression from the features to the target, you get a prediction of the target, subtract that prediction off. And so now your new target is neutralized with respect to the features in that era. And then you do that for every era.
Oh, you're doing it beforehand. I was looking at that code of the person who modified their predictions after the fact.
You could do that too. That's another thing to do, but yeah, I was training on neutralized target. That's how you make the neutralized targets. You just do a linear regression.
See, that I understood, but when I saw in the forum the post by, and forgive me, I forget who posted it now, but they had Jacker Parker, I think. They had neutralized their predictions after the fact. And I didn't quite understand how that was being done, but I think I'll just stick with the target neutralization first. That makes more sense.
Yeah, that was like I mean, it's really just like a projection. So you have this, you're trying to find what's the orthogonal component. So you might have some of your signal strength coming from one feature or a couple of features. And if you just say, well, what's the model saying if I were to be neutral to those features or orthogonal to those features, is what the other code that we shared was about.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, and I've been playing catch up on code since I finally fixed my XGBoost issues. So I've been flying a little fast on getting all this written. So yeah, I didn't really have time to sit down and look at the code. But yeah, thanks for that, Michael. That was very helpful. I did think that it was the simple linear regression and then just subtracting out.
Right.
with that
So
model coming up with.
I actually did both. The thing I talked about in the chat a while back too, where you one-hot encode all of the things and do the linear regression from the one-hot encoded values to it's sort of like a generalized additive model from all the features to the target. I did so I have one model that uses that type of neutralization and one type that uses just the linear neutralization that they did as well. And they seem to be doing a little bit different. But yeah, so doing it the second way that I called it like super neutralized, there's definitely much less signal left in there.
I would imagine, yeah. Hey, let's take a really hard data set and make it even harder.
Basically.
Who came up with that idea, damn it? Yeah, what are some recommended ways to use the feature categories? You know, I think about this sometimes. Like, XGBoost has a way that you can designate which columns can be interacted. And so I thought about, well, what if you constrained XGBoost to only consider interactions across the groups rather than within the groups? Since the features are thought to be correlated across time. So a charisma from era 1 is still correlated all the way through to era 120. But what if you restricted those interactions from happening within charisma, and instead where charisma interacted with intellect, right? So that would be very interesting. It's something that I've been thinking on this past week, but I don't know that I'm going to do it because that sounds like a whole big project that I, quite frankly, don't have time to do. So there, somebody take my idea and run with it. Maybe that'll give me MMC because then people diverge away from what I'm doing.
Yeah, something like that with neural nets, and didn't seem to work.
In neural nets, you're saying you tried that and it didn't seem to work?
Yeah.
Could it be that it was just the neural net, or perhaps the way you're
quite likely? I mean, I didn't probably do proper hyperparameter tuning, but essentially the idea was to have these feature groups feed into different heads in the neural net, and then finally just add them up, quite like a generalized additive model. But yeah, might just work better with XGBoost. Who knows?
Yeah, and before I started recording, we were talking about neural nets, and I said, I don't really mess with neural nets. I'm not a big fan of the black box. I like to be able to see what the model's doing. I'm an empiricist, so I have to be able to look at this stuff. But I was saying that since we can print what the XGBoost model looks like, that's beneficial. Neural nets being this black box, not terribly a huge fan, but they do look at interaction.
Necessarily.
Go ahead.
You can visualize feature importances with neural nets as well. I mean, certain architectures. You might want to look at something called TabNet. It's a fairly recent paper from sometime late last year.
Oh, so that's still pretty cutting edge then. If you could put that in chat, I'd appreciate it. I'd like to look at the link. I'm sure other people would too.
Sure.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, so, but what I was getting at was that neural nets and XGBoost, or tree-based models in general, they do look at the interactions. And so that's how they're similar, at least in my elementary view of machine learning models. And so that could be a way to look at categories. So whether you choose a neural net or a tree-based model, I guess that depends on the user. They're both very powerful, and they come up with different solutions. That's helpful. Elementary school level question. Well, be careful with that because this is a very difficult challenge. I don't think there are elementary school level questions. This is all really high-end stuff. Why does Unit 16 or Unit 8 data types in Python help reduce memory on trees but not on Keras? Good God, I have no freaking clue. I don't know shit about computer science. That's how much I know. My background is finance. So I'm going to defer. I'm going to punt and see if anybody else wants to answer this question.
Yeah, I just posted a link to the Stack Overflow, and it's basically because it returns like an integer, so you can do float. So I mean that's how like a real number, and so that's my, I mean, I have no idea. I just have to like Google it up. But like, I mean, I guess it makes sense that, you know, like things like trace and XGBoost like gives you like, can give you like sort of like floats versus real numbers. Whereas like most neural networks like give you out like a yes or no, sort of like a binary output, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes sense to me. I like it. I'll subscribe to your podcast. That's pretty good. I appreciate the quick Google
I could
too.
probably explain this.
Yeah, JRB, take it.
Sure. Yeah. So with neural networks, and for that matter, even linear models, it's usually a good idea to standardize your inputs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to tree-based models, essentially the way you look at a tree-based model is that it tries to split the data set with the best possible split. So in some ways, it's scale invariant. But that being said, I don't think there's anything preventing you from training a neural net with int8 features, because this is what I do for my day job. I do a lot of model quantization, which is essentially trying to compress models to fit them on mobile phones and embedded devices and things like that.
Wow.
And there it's all int8, right? So it's just that it makes convergence a lot harder. And yeah, but there are a lot of tricks, like is the case with everything else with neural nets. So you can essentially still train your neural nets with int8, but I think the established wisdom is that it's easier to train with floating point features, which are standardized, which is zero mean and unit variance.
Right. Okay. Hey, thanks for that. That was very helpful.
I think by default, Keras will just convert everything to float 32 also, unless you do work to tell it to not do that. So just by default, it's because things usually want things to run on GPU, which is usually float 32. So by default, Keras is just going to upconvert whatever you pass it to float 32. So
yeah, I think one thing you could do if you're using Keras is there's this layer called a lambda layer, and you could possibly feed it int8 inputs, and you could just upscale the batch as the first layer in your neural net to float 32s. I don't know. I mean, I haven't used Keras in a while, so I'm not really sure if it worked, but it's definitely worth trying.
Yeah, what neural network modules or packages are people using these days? Anybody willing to divulge their package?
I've been using JAX for a couple of months now. It's pretty good.
How about you, Mike P? The master key model is built in which framework?
Master key model is built in a very simple framework called scikit neural net. It's just a Keras wrapper around scikit-learn. So you can like kind of plug it in with all your like XGBoost models and things like that, just using like simple feed forward neural net. So yeah, it's pretty easy. It gives you access to things like dropout and all the popular bells and whistles, but it doesn't let you do too much like crazy stuff like custom loss functions or anything like that. So yep.
I don't believe you. I don't believe you at all, but to each their own. Yeah, so that's really great. I appreciate all the community members hopping in and answering questions that I have no clue about and really have no business answering in the first place. I don't do neural nets, don't profess to know anything about them at all. My knowledge of neural nets is very, very basic, but I know there's some experts in this crowd. So thank you guys very, very much. I feel emboldened by the new machine I got. Does it make sense to make a massive neural net with hundreds of layers and tons of custom features, or am I wasting my time? So I resemble this question because I just built a new box. I'm very happy with it now that I finally got XGBoost installed. No, I don't think it makes sense to build a very complex model. This goes back to the conversation that Bor and I had where he's using this very complex genetic algorithm, and I'm not doing anything close to that. This falls back into Occam's razor, and that's going to be my default answer when it comes to choosing complexity over simplicity. So there is some balance to be had there. So, I mean, make a massive neural net with hundreds of layers and tons of custom features because you can. And see how hot it gets in your room, right? I've tried to run something on GPU here, and thank God it's raining outside because it got really hot in my little den office space that I'm using. So just for the sake of vanity to do that, go for it. I just don't know that I'd stake on something like that. Was validation 1 not very representative of the old test set? I don't think that's true, because I think it was good, because I trained on it and I was ranked 20 plus, or 20 or less, in the top 20 for 2.5 months. So it had to have been representative, or I wouldn't have done very well. Validation 2, is validation 2 more similar to the new test set? Well, I don't think we have a new test set per se. They've just blocked out some of that data and turned it into a validation period. And do you think that Val 2 is more representative of live data? This is where I'm urging caution, because this COVID-19 regime shift is included in that validation 2. And so if validation 2 is nothing but extremely high correlation across all asset categories, then it's going to produce some very interesting results. But I don't think that's going to hold across a very long frame of time. But it may be good in times of high stress. Yeah, let's see if I think when I was watching the news earlier, there was a bit of sell-off going on. And so if volatility is correlated with validation 2, and that's indicative of performance, then we'll see that play out. But I just don't think validation 2 is strong enough by itself to use it for any kind of inference by itself. I think it's a combination of validation 1 and 2 that matters, because it's much more validation data than we've ever had, and they're disjoint, not only in time, but also in regime. That's awesome. That's a fantastic validation data set, but it's both. So I want to discourage the thinking of it in terms of validation 1 and 2 and look at it instead of just validation.
Yeah, I think my question was also like, I plan to use validation 1 and 2 as my test set essentially at the end when I'm done with my model. And if it does hold up, then I'm hoping that it will do well on live data as well.
I think it would. I think it would.
Okay.
So if you can get consistency for the entire validation set, what is it? I guess it'll be 20 eras. I can't remember the whole count.
22.
22, thank you. Okay, so if you do good across all 22, you have a very good model. And previously, if you did very good on all 12 validation eras, you had a pretty decent model. I think that the additional eras just add more, I guess, validation, right? I couldn't think of a better word, but it does. It just validates your model a little bit better, as long as you don't peek at it too often. Because again, once you evaluate your model on the validation data, you're done. That's it. That was your hypothesis test. If you do it again, you have to divide your test statistic by 2. Right? If we were doing this in an empirical sense. So every time you take a peek at the validation data as an out of sample test, you're reducing its validity as a test. So that's why I just urge extreme caution with all this stuff.
Yeah,
let me
so
see. So
if it doesn't hold up on validation, what do I do?
Okay, so like let's say you get all negative results across all 22 eras. You just
start over with something else.
Yeah, sorry, man. Check your cross validation. Make sure you're not looking at all the data at once in every model run. Last week, if you recall, I tell my students to divide the data in 3, train 3 different models, and then average them, and you'll get better performance. So that would be the very first thing I would try with your model, is to take the training data, divide it into 3 by era. So like era 1 through 40, 41 through 80, and 81 through 120. Generate predictions on all 3 of those, average them together, and then see how you do out of sample. If it improves, then what you've shown is that you were overfit individually, but the ensembling of them reduced the bias and generated a decent out of sample prediction. It's still overfit though.
assuming that you're overfitting randomly, right? Like if you're overfitting the same way, then it doesn't cancel out.
The weakness from one individual fold will be overcome by the weakness in the other two, hopefully.
As long as they're not the same, right?
Yeah, as long as they're not making the exact same errors in the exact same way.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't, because the errors are pretty disjoint. I've had, let me see, I've had almost 60 students come through, and I have yet to see somebody who averaged across and didn't have an improvement in performance.
Right.
So I think it's a pretty useful way to handle the data, but it's not for everybody. It just happens to work with the simple stuff that I'm teaching my students.
That makes sense, I think.
But give it a shot. Like if it's not too complex of a model and you can afford the degrees of freedom, go for it. What if I merge validation data 1 with the training data so that I get more data to train on? Well, that's exactly what I do. I don't know. I'm just a newbie to data science. Well, that's what Office Hours with Arbitrage is for. So you can ask these questions and you can have a whole bunch of other people take a look at it and talk about it. So
Okay.
I would encourage you to go ahead and just ask that publicly. No problem. Yeah, so what you can do is, yes, you can combine or concatenate eras 120 with eras 121 through 132 and use that as your training data. The problem is then you can't use it as inference. You have to upload your predictions and then wait because you don't have any way to validate. So the very, very important thing to do if you do use the strategy is to first make sure that your parameters are set for each model and that you do everything you possibly can to limit your model's chance to overfit. Because if you just turn it loose on all this data, you don't have any way to see if you've grossly overfit until you turn it loose on the tournament. And yeah, that's the risk. So I would encourage you first to build a model on eras 1 through 120, get that dialed in and feel really good about it. And then add those additional 12 eras, retrain it with the same settings, the same parameters and all that stuff, and then run both of them. That's what I do.
Okay.
So that's my advice. That's a good question, and no problem.
Okay.
Are there other indices out there like the VIX that track something interesting? Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of indexes. That's like one of the finance industry's greatest things is to build indices and portfolios so we can track things. So there's tons of indices that are interesting. Maybe a zero beta funds are failing index. There is actually a hedge fund index. I think, what is it, hedgefundresearch.com or hedgefunddatabase.com? Anyway, there are indices that exist for hedge funds, and they do have categories of hedge funds for those indices. There's even an artificial intelligence indice, although I don't know if it would be relevant to Numerai. Maybe Richard, if you're still listening in, do you report to any of the hedge fund tracking databases? He may have stepped away, or he may not want to answer it. But yeah, there are indices that exist. I would look at the AI index and also the equity quant index and see what's going on. Oh, there he is.
We used to.
Used
It
to?
was one we reported to like for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
Then we decided to go dark.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no point in reporting until you have to, right?
It's weird. A lot of the good funds don't report to those things.
Right.
And a lot of the bad funds. So I often think they're a bit too high. They're a bit higher than they should be because they kind of get the funds that are just doing well report. Other ones don't.
Richard, are you aware of any index that tracks flow of funds into different strategies for hedge funds?
No, actually.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Yeah,
I know there's
it's not
ETF
really
flow
public.
data.
Yeah, it wouldn't be really public, I don't think.
No. How can I time the moment when I should change the stake of my model? So this goes to risk management. I said that I don't want any more than 400 at stake on arbitrage. So I guess in the current regime, I kind of have to guess if I think I'm going to go over and then time it 1 month out how much I should withdraw. The alternative is if your model is constantly growing, just queue up a withdrawal of a fixed amount every time that you can. I don't know what the next system is going to look like, but I guess I can put somebody on the spot and ask. How about either Jason or Mike? Are you willing to take a question on what you've been working on this week?
I don't know how ready I am to talk about it. We are doing like a redesign based on all the feedback in Rocket Chat, like about how stuff doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, there have been quite a few rule changes lately, just with kind of doing away with some of the daily delta things that didn't really make sense. So we're bringing everything back to sort of like a per week kind of mindset. And yeah, this whole week, like me, Sly Fox, and Jason have just been like kind of designing and brainstorming and trying to get the website to a point where it makes sense and you know what all the numbers mean and they're all easy to calculate and things like that. So yeah, there's been like our design sprint this week. Hopefully it clears up a lot of the concerns. Like we've been using all the Rocket Chat comments as kind of the driving force behind this. So yeah, I mean, all I can say is I hope you guys like it when we put it out sometime next week, probably.
Okay, so it's still an active work in process. And we'll definitely probably talk more about that. Kino even put something in chat, but this question was asking about how to change stakes. And so my question is specific to the withdrawal process. Is there anything in the works on changing withdrawals?
Yeah, we talked about it as part of this design sprint. It's just like a little bit more complex than we wanted to do for this week because like you have to deal with ETH contracts basically. So no, it is like a very big concern. Like I hate that you can't adjust your stakes when you want to. We've been talking about ways to put in kind of an auto staking idea where you have like a target, like you say, you have 400 NMR as your target. And then like every week it tries to adjust to get you as close to 400 NMR as it can. So yeah, no, it's at like the top of the next design list. It's not going to be done this week because like it does the touch ETH contracts and we don't want to block all the other website design stuff with that.
Right.
But yeah, no, it is something that really annoys us. So yeah, we're thinking about it still.
So if we just keep our pitchforks out and keep it in Rocket Chat, it'll be front of mind for you guys.
Yeah, just keep bothering us and yeah, it'll get done eventually.
Accepted. Staking change deal was, are there signals showing changes in the market conditions? And then hashtag staking strategy is not dead. I completely agree that staking strategy is not dead. I just don't know how we can utilize any information to improve our staking outcomes. Other than that, we should be able to adjust our stakes downward as fast as we can increase them. Marcos's book talks about discrete maths and quantum computers. Is there an introduction about these topics? I have no idea. This is another one of those things that's completely out of field and I don't know anything about it. Yeah, maybe ask in Rocket Chat because I have no clue. And spiking neural nets. I mean, what's with all these neural net questions this week? You guys are trying to kill me. I don't have a freaking clue what a spiking neural net is, and I don't think I want to know. So I'm going to punt on that too, unless somebody wants to talk about spiking neural nets. I thought it was fake. So I Googled it and I read the Wikipedia page on spiking neural nets. They are a real thing and it's actually pretty interesting, but geez, I just don't have any clue if you could implement something like that and have it work.
Go for it,
I'm going to say that this goes back to Occam's razor once again.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of this, it's probably more trouble than it's worth. I mean, you probably could do it, but it's going to be, I mean, generally there's no real advantage for spiking neural nets for most statistical machine learning types of problems. Theorists find them interesting as models for what brains actually do. But if you're just trying to learn a function, there's more straightforward ways. Just because the gradient, I mean, trying to deal with gradients with spiking neural nets is tricky at best.
Yeah, sure. Whatever you say, boss. I don't have a damn clue. But yeah, trying to make it like a regular brain, like that's all interesting. But even in empirical finance, the smartest finance researchers in history only came up with mean variance optimization 60 years ago. So let's take a chill pill. We're working on equities. I don't know that a spiking neural net is the best application to solve our problem here. But hey, you know what? If you have the ability to implement a spiking neural net and you can iterate across and do all your scoring metrics, by God, go for it, because that thing's going to have some MMC, because nobody else is doing that. So that's actually probably a very good thing to try. Why are you not using staging for deploying changes to the user interface?
Yeah, I think I need some backup on this one. Because we do test stuff locally. Like, it's not like we're not testing the stuff, right? So I guess the question is more in regards to the users should have some more input before we actually deploy it. And I guess my answer would just be for turnover time. Patrick, I see you jumping in here. Thank
We'll
God.
test it in production.
I agree. We should be doing more of that staging stuff. Right now, the multi-accounts is actually in production, but it's feature flagged in the beta group. So yeah, I think we can do more of that. It's just a matter of us implementing it. So it's good feedback.
Unfortunately, I can't participate differences in time zones, but I want to listen what you will discuss on the meeting. Can you record and post link to video? Well, we do record. The summaries are written by a very, very helpful person, Anthony, who's present now. I'll save his anonymity and leave him to listen to this later, but he does a good job of writing up these summaries, and it gives me the chance to go back and see, did I say anything that was really idiotic, and kind of edit that out. That's something that I want to work on over the summers. I'm gonna have a lot more free time, and so maybe do like a Twitch stream instead of a Zoom. Yeah, I do want to have more content out there. I think what we've discussed over the last 9 weeks, I can't believe it's 9 weeks. We've covered a lot of ground. I've learned a lot, and I hope everybody else has too. I do want to have some content out there, but I also want the office hours to be a specific place where we can talk about things and ask the quote unquote dumb questions and not fear the reprisals of, people picking on you, making fun of you. So Michael Oliver, so your era boosted trees, I posted that on GitHub. It got accepted as a pull request. I've tinkered with it a bit. So I was actually running it before I had to hop on here. One of the things I was looking at was the only optimization parameter for the era boosted trees is the correlation. So I wonder if there's a way to do this era boosted trees with 2 optimization parameters, not just correlation, but maybe throw in something else. Is that going to be possible in that framework?
What do you mean exactly?
So the era boosting trees.
Oh yeah, okay. So you're saying that it's choosing, what other metric were you thinking of?
Well, I don't even know. The smart sharpe's in there, but that's the sum of all the errors, right? So that doesn't really directly optimize. But I also played around with changing the proportion.
Sure.
Number of trees.
Oh
but
yeah, I mean,
this thing is so grossly overfit. I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, I mean, you can play with all the parameters of just XGBoost as well too. You can change the column sampling. You can change the proportion, as you said. Yeah, those are all things that one could play with. You could add whatever metric you want, because it's just using a mean squared error to fit the thing, and you're choosing which eras based on whatever metric you want. So you could potentially put like an autocorrelation metric or whatever metric you want in there too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that I want to improve on, because I finally got it to a point where I have a correlation on validation using the error boosted notebook that I put up there. I'm at 0.037, but I just think it's grossly overfixed. I'm showing sharp scores of 5 or 8 and correlation of 0.4 in some cases is ridiculously overfit.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing to evaluate. If you look at, for example, the integration test model, its in-sample performance is super high. And so this idea that your in-sample performance and your out-of-sample performance should be the same, doesn't really hold.
Not in this data set.
Yeah, and there's interesting reasons for that, but the only real way that matters for evaluating how overfit something is out of sample performance. Yep. And so worrying too much about your in-sample performance being too high or whatnot, I don't think that's necessarily worth worrying about too much. All that matters is generalization performance.
Yeah, so one thing I tried to do was I took the error boosted notebook and I put 100 trees per step and I did 20 iterations, because that gets you to the 2000 estimator equivalent of integration test. And so I'm still tinkering a little bit on that, but I find that very interesting. My concern is that it's oversampling some eras far too often, but I haven't gone through and looked at that in particular. Just want to throw that out there to see if anybody else was also tinkering on it.
Yeah, when I tinkered with it, I noticed some kind of interesting oscillation where there definitely seemed to be groups of eras that would come in and out in a, it would basically, and I would notice the histogram plot thing. It would get flatter and then more jaggy, and then flatter and then more jaggy. And it seemed, yeah, there was kind of an interesting oscillatory effect with it.
Mike's nodding along in excited agreement here.
Yeah, I mean, the proportion parameter is important for tuning down that like oscillation. Like if you lower the proportion parameter, then you get like a lot less oscillation and it's more consistent growth. But 0.5 is like what we found to be kind of the best in our tests. But yeah, you can like, if you don't like that oscillation or don't trust it or something, you can try moving it down to 0.2 or something like that maybe. So
what did you guys internally tinker with so that I don't have to do it myself?
Not too much. It's kind of an idea that's been floating around for a while and we wanted to just put out there. So I just kind of threw together some code and it takes too long to run. I didn't even do more than like 200 trees. And yeah, I just played with the proportion a little bit just to see, because I saw the oscillation thing as well. So that's the only reason I even bothered with the proportion parameter. I wanted to see that be a little bit smoother. But it's still all wide open. I don't know what's best, honestly.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna toy with it some more, but at least there's a notebook out there that works. I think that was important to at least equalize it for the user base. And then Michael, if you're still willing, if you could put up code in the forum, I can throw a notebook up so that's in example scripts for the feature neutralized target. It's 5 o'clock. If there's nothing else, I'll call it a week and see you guys on Rocket Chat.